My name is Vivian Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and 3 months ago, my parents showed me the exact monetary value of my place in our family. I had traveled nearly 14 hours, flying from Seattle, Washington to Woodstock, Vermont, to attend my younger sister's wedding. I arrived at the historic stone estate carrying a beautifully packaged heirloom gift, genuinely believing that despite our complicated past, my family would be happy to see me. Instead, my mother stepped out onto the gravel driveway, physically blocking the entrance to the manor. My father stood a few paces behind her, hands in his pockets, refusing to even look me in the eye. My mother stared right through me and said, "This is an intimate event for immediate, real family only. You weren't officially invited, Vivian. Please leave before you make a scene and embarrass your sister." I stood there in the chilly Vermont air, completely paralyzed. I had already paid a non-refundable $6,000 deposit to secure the historic venue, the catering, and the florist. What they didn't realize, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that the remaining $45,000 balance was scheduled to be charged to my authorization card the Monday after the reception. While I was processing her words, the groom's wealthy mother walked out of the double doors. Sensing the tension, she politely asked who I was. Without breaking a sweat, my mother smiled warmly and explained that I was a representative from the vendor's administrative and billing office, who had, unfortunately, shown up at the wrong hour. My father didn't utter a word of correction. I could have shattered their carefully constructed illusion right then and there. I could have exposed the entire lie in front of the prestigious guests. But I refused to let my sister's wedding turn into a screaming match. I turned around, carried my gift back to the rental car, and drove away as the string quartet began to play in the distance. 3 days later, my mother finally called. She didn't ask if I had made it back to Seattle safely. She didn't apologize. Her very first words were, "The final invoice is $45,000, Vivian. Why hasn't the transaction gone through yet?" I let out a cold laugh and gave her an answer that left her completely speechless. Before I tell you exactly what I said, let me ask, what is the weather like where you are right now? And does it match your current mood? Also, where are you reading or listening to this from? I'm always fascinated to see how far these stories of self-respect can travel. If you believe in drawing hard lines with people who only value you for what you can provide, please make sure to save this story. Now, let me take you back 5 months to the phone call that set this entire trap in motion. 5 months earlier, I was sitting in my Seattle apartment auditing a massive corporate tax portfolio when my younger sister Clara called me via video. She was beaming, holding her left hand right up to the camera to show off an emerald-cut sapphire ring. She screamed that Tristan Thorne had proposed during their trip to the Swiss Alps. I was genuinely thrilled for her. Clara was 26, 8 years younger than me, and had spent her entire life romanticizing the perfect high society wedding. Tristan was a polite, well-to-do man who worked executive operations for his family's luxury boutique hotel chain, Thorne Hospitality. As Clara chattered endlessly about silk drapes and champagne towers, I noticed our mother, Evelyn, hovering in the background. When I mentioned that I was going to book my flights and request PTO, Evelyn leaned into the screen. Her smile was tight. She told me not to purchase anything just yet, claiming that the guest list was incredibly tight and they were trying to keep things extremely local to save on costs. I reminded her that Glada was my only sister. Evelyn just patted Glada's shoulder and murmured that they were still sorting out the seating charts. Glada quickly shifted the conversation to describe the Stonehaven Manor, a breathtaking historic estate in Vermont where she had always dreamed of getting married. The call ended, but a cold knot of unease formed in my stomach. My mother didn't sound like she was worried about my flight costs. She sounded like she was actively trying to prevent me from coming. A week later, both of my parents called me on a joint line. In our family, a joint call from Richard and Evelyn Mercer only meant one thing. They needed money. My father owned a high-end antique furniture restoration shop in Vermont. He was an incredibly talented artisan, but he was a terrible businessman. He had recently overextended his credit. A major client had delayed a massive payment, and his workshop was on the brink of a forced restructuring. My mother began the call by telling me how much Clara looked up to me. Then my father explained the situation. The venue and the high-end vendors required immediate, substantial deposits to lock in the date. Tristan's family was covering the rehearsal dinner, the heavy-duty transportation, and an extravagant honeymoon in the French Riviera, while our family was expected to pay for the main ceremony and reception. Dad called it a temporary liquidity issue. Mom assured me that they just needed a reliable, high-credit cosigner to get the contracts approved and secure the booking. "What is the total?" I asked. After a long, heavy silence, my father said, $51,000. Mom jumped in, her voice sweet and frantic. She explained that I would only need to pay the initial $6,000 deposit right away. The vendors would then allow the event host to run the remaining $45,000 after the wedding. She swore up and down that they would have the funds ready by then. I asked why Tristan's wealthy family couldn't just guarantee it. Mom's tone immediately turned defensive. She said the Thorns were already paying for so much, and Dad's pride was on the line. He wanted to prove the Mercers could pull their own weight. Then, my father dropped the real hook. Tristan's family was planning a massive multi-million-dollar renovation of their historic hotels, and they were actively considering Dad's workshop for the lucrative millwork and custom furniture contracts. Suddenly, this wedding wasn't just about Clara's happy day. It was about Dad's failing business, Mom's social reputation, and a corporate contract they were desperate to land. I should have said no. Over the last 5 years, I had quietly paid off my father's tax liens, funded a portion of Clara's college tuition, and purchased expensive machinery for his shop. Each time, they showered me with gratitude until the funds cleared, only to return to a cold, distant status quo. But I loved my sister, and I didn't want her to lose her dream venue because of my parents' financial mismanagement. As a senior forensic financial auditor, I don't sign anything without reading the fine print. I demanded the contracts. I reviewed every clause. The listed event hosts were Richard Mercer, Evelyn Mercer, Clara Mercer, and Tristan Thorn. My name was nowhere near the primary liability. Instead, I signed a separate third-party payment authorization form. It allowed the vendors to charge my card for the $6,000 deposit and stated that the final $45,000 balance could only be processed with my explicit written confirmation on the Monday following the event. If I declined, the legal liability for the outstanding balance reverted entirely to the primary event hosts. I highlighted this section, emailed it to my parents, and asked if they understood. Mom brushed it off, calling it standard administrative jargon that wouldn't matter because they would have the cash by then. I signed the authorization and paid the deposit. Mom called me her saving angel. Clara sent me a flood of emotional texts, calling me the best big sister in the universe. 2 days later, Clara accidentally sent a screenshot of a wedding planning group chat to me, realizing only too late that I wasn't in it. When I confronted her, she laughed nervously and said the chat was just for local logistics, and that the 3-hour time difference between Seattle and Vermont made my inclusion inconvenient. As the weeks rolled by, no formal invitation arrived in my mailbox. When I asked Clara about it, she giggled and said, "Viv, your immediate family. You don't need a piece of paper to know you're invited." Then my mother called and begged me not to post anything about the wedding on social media, claiming the Thorns were deeply private people. Meanwhile, Clara was posting daily updates of her dress fittings, luxury cake tastings, and venue tours. In every photo, my parents posed with Tristan's wealthy family, acting as though they were effortlessly financing this lavish affair. My father posted about how years of dedication and success had allowed him to give his daughter the wedding she deserved. I was completely erased. I told myself I didn't need the public praise, but in my profession, I am trained to recognize patterns of deception. I ignored my gut because I wanted to believe my family loved me. 2 weeks before the wedding, I still hadn't received an itinerary. Clara casually told me over text to wear something neutral, like champagne or emerald green, and that the ceremony started at 3 p.m. When I asked about the rehearsal dinner, she dodged the question, calling it a dry, formal gathering for the bridal party and local partners. I booked my flights, took my leave, and purchased a gorgeous, expensive set of personalized luggage for their honeymoon. 3 days before my flight, Clara posted photos from the rehearsal dinner. She was standing under a floral archway, flanked by Evelyn and Victoria Thorne. The caption read, "Surrounded by the pure hearts who made this dream a reality." I had literally paid the money that kept the venue from canceling their booking, yet I was treated like a ghost. I texted Clara. Hours later, she replied that the dinner had turned into an intimate, last-minute administrative lunch, and she didn't want to bother me while I was traveling. The night before I left Seattle, Mom called and told me to go straight to my hotel when I landed. She insisted their house was overflowing with decorations and boxes, and that I should just show up at the venue right before the ceremony to avoid the chaos. I asked if Clara wanted me to help her get ready. Mom snapped back too quickly, saying the bridal suite was incredibly small and already packed with bridesmaids. I closed my eyes and convinced myself it was just wedding stress. On the day of the wedding, I arrived at Stonehaven Manor 20 minutes before the ceremony. The air was crisp and the estate was stunning. But when I reached the guest check-in kiosk, the coordinator couldn't find Vivian Mercer on her digital list. I politely told her I was the bride's older sister. The woman's face paled. She whispered into her walkie-talkie. Less than 2 minutes later, my parents walked out. My mother looked pristine in a champagne silk gown. My father looked sharp in a tailored tuxedo. Neither of them smiled. Mom stopped a few feet away from me, her eyes darting nervously toward the arriving guests. "Vivian, what are you doing here?" she whispered harshly. I let out a confused laugh. "I'm here for Clara's wedding. My flight landed last night." Mom stepped closer, lowering her voice to a venomous hiss. "We told you this was an intimate, local event. Tristan's family is highly influential, Vivian. There is only room for real, immediate family inside. You weren't invited. You need to leave before you make a scene and ruin Clara's day." I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at my father. "Dad, are you seriously going to let her say this to me?" My father looked down at his polished shoes. "Vivian, you should have read between the lines. Don't do this here. Don't embarrass your sister." "Read between the lines?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Was I real family when you needed my credit card to pay the $6,000 deposit? Was I immediate family then? "Keep your voice down," Mom hissed. At that moment, Victoria Thorne stepped out onto the gravel pathway. "Evelyn, dear, is everything all right?" she asked, eyeing us. For a split second, I thought my mother would finally break and introduce me as her eldest daughter. Instead, Evelyn flashed a brilliant fake smile. "Oh, Victoria, yes, everything is perfectly fine. This is just a representative from the venue's billing department. There was a slight scheduling mix-up with the invoice presentation, but we are sorting it out." Victoria looked slightly bewildered. "Oh, I thought all the finances were handled weeks ago." Evelyn laughed airily. "Just a minor administrative detail, darling. Go back inside." My father stood there and let the lie hang in the air. Then I looked up at the second-floor window of the manor. The glass was clear. Clara was standing there in her white lace gown, holding her bouquet. Our eyes locked. She didn't look shocked to see me standing on the gravel. She looked terrified. But she didn't open the window. She didn't call my name. She slowly took a step back into the shadows and turned her back to me. She knew. They all knew. "I understand," I said quietly to my parents. I turned around, walked back to my rental car carrying my heavy gift, and got inside. Behind me, I heard my mother call out, "Vivian, don't be so dramatic." I sat in the car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I realized that my entire life I had been operating under the delusion that if I just kept solving their financial crises, they would eventually love me. Instead, they had used my resources to build a golden pedestal and then pushed me off it so I wouldn't ruin the view. Then, my professional training kicked in. The emotional fog cleared, replaced by ice-cold, analytical precision. I opened my phone and recorded a voice memo detailing the exact time, the location, the exact words spoken by Evelyn and Richard, and the name of the witness, Victoria Thorne. I emailed the audio and my written notes to myself to secure a permanent digital timestamp. Just as the chapel bells began to ring, a notification popped up on my phone from the Stonehaven Manor billing portal. Final invoice reconciliation ready for host approval. Authorization required by Monday at 12 p.m. The total was $45,000. At the bottom of the digital screen were two buttons, Approve Payment and Decline Authorization. I looked back at the grand stone manor where my family was celebrating without me. Then I looked at the screen. I put the car in drive and left. Back at my hotel, I didn't let anger guide my hand. I opened my laptop and meticulously downloaded every single contract, agreement, and email thread. Legally, the situation was crystal clear. The venue, catering, and floral contracts were signed by Richard, Evelyn, Clara, and Tristan as the primary event hosts. My separate third-party authorization form clearly stated that if I declined the final billing, the vendor was contractually obligated to seek the outstanding balance from the primary hosts. I wasn't leaving the small businesses high and dry. I was simply refusing to volunteer $45,000 of my hard-earned money for a party I was banned from attending. That evening, Clara left a voicemail. Her voice was light, slightly breathless from dancing. "Hey, Viv. The ceremony was absolutely magical, and the reception is stunning. Look, I'm so sorry things got a little awkward outside earlier. Mom just panicked because we had told Tristan's family that you couldn't make it due to work, and she didn't want them thinking we lied. Anyway, I see the final billing notification just went out. Please make sure to approve the reconciliation so the vendors can close out the night. Thank you so much for making my dream wedding possible, Viv. You really are the best sister anyone could ask for. Love you." I listened to it twice. The best sister. I was only the best sister when I was a silent, compliant ATM. At 9 p.m., my Aunt Beatrice called. She was my father's older sister, a sharp, retired family court judge who had always been a straight shooter. She had attended the wedding and immediately noticed my absence. She told me that during the reception, Evelyn had given a tearful speech about how she and Richard had sacrificed everything to give Clara the wedding of her dreams, while my father publicly thanked the Thorne family for joining their prestigious lineages. Knowing my father's business was failing, Beatrice had smelled a rat. When I told her the entire truth, from the $6,000 deposit to being called a billing representative on the driveway, the phone went dead silent. When Beatrice spoke, her voice was like steel. "Vivian, as a former judge and your aunt, I am telling you this. Do exactly what the legal documents allow. Do not light yourself on fire to keep those cowards warm. Let the adults who sign those contracts bear the weight of their own choices." Her words anchored me. On Sunday morning, the 4 final invoices landed in my inbox. Venue hire, $18,000. High-end catering, $15,500. Custom florals, $7,000. Photography and entertainment, $4,500. I called the billing managers of all 4 businesses. I confirmed that declining my authorization would immediately redirect the collection invoices to the primary event hosts. I requested written confirmation of this transfer. Then, with a calm, steady hand, I clicked Decline Authorization on all 4 files. In the reason field, I wrote, "Third-party authorization withdrawn. Services were not rendered to the cardholder, who was excluded from the venue. Please redirect billing to primary contract hosts." I didn't call them names. I didn't write an angry letter. I just let the system work. I boarded my flight back to Seattle on Monday morning. While crossing the Rocky Mountains, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. The storm hit on Tuesday morning, exactly 3 days after the wedding. My phone lit up at 9:15 a.m. It was my mother. Her voice was incredibly sweet, dripping with forced warmth. "Vivian, darling, I hope you made it back to Seattle safely. I know weddings can be so emotional, and what happened at the entrance was just a silly, stressful misunderstanding. I'm so sorry if your feelings were hurt." "Which part was the misunderstanding, Mom?" I asked calmly. "The part where you told me I wasn't real family, or the part where you lied to Victoria Thorne and called me a billing clerk?" Her voice instantly sharpened, losing its sugary coating. "We don't have time for your theatrics, Vivian. The vendors just called us. They said your payment was declined, and they've transferred the outstanding $45,000 to our accounts. There has obviously been a glitch. You need to call them and fix this immediately." I let out a soft laugh. "There's no glitch, Mom. I hand-selected decline on every single invoice." She gasped, a sharp, horrified intake of breath. "Are you insane? How do you expect us to pay that?" I delivered the line I had been holding in my heart for 3 days. "You told me only family was allowed inside, Mom, so I figured the family inside can pay for it." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then she exploded. She called me selfish, cruel, and childish, accusing me of ruining Clara's marriage before it even began. She admitted that she had lied to Tristan's family, telling them I was a deeply troubled, estranged relative who refused to support Clara. Why? Because the Thornes valued high society, unified families, and my father needed the hotel restoration contract to save his business. My presence as a working-class, self-made auditor didn't fit the picture-perfect, wealthy narrative Evelyn had sold them. "I raised you," she screamed. "Your father's business will collapse if he loses the Thorne contract. Clara and Tristan cannot start their lives with $45,000 of debt." 4 adults signed those contracts, Mom. It's time for those 4 adults to act like it, I said, and hung up. 20 minutes later, Clara called, sobbing hysterically. Tristan had received the redirected invoices and was demanding to know why my parents hadn't paid their share. He had been completely under the impression that my parents were wealthy enough to cover the reception. "Vivian, please," Clara begged. "Tristan is furious. He didn't even know you paid the deposit. If his parents find out we lied about our family's finances, they'll pull Dad's contract and look at me differently. Can't you just pay half?" Even in her apology, she was calculating how much of my life savings she could claw back. "I will be happy to talk about our relationship, Clara, when you are ready to have a conversation that doesn't involve my bank account," I told her and ended the call. That afternoon, my father called. He sounded defeated, claiming the stress was ruining his health. He accused me of letting his business die just to prove a point. "Did you ever intend to pay me back that $45,000, Dad?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he admitted the truth. They had planned to use the expected profits from the Thorn Hotel renovation contract to eventually pay me back over several years. They had literally planned to force me to carry their high-interest debt so they could profit off a lie. I sent a single joint email to my parents, Clara, and Tristan. I attached all the legal contracts and wrote, "All future communications regarding this matter must be in writing. I will not authorize any payments. Any future relationship with me requires a written, explicit acknowledgement of what occurred on the driveway of Stonehaven Manor, without excuses." But the story didn't end there. Aunt Beatrice kept her word. When Victoria Thorne contacted her to ask why the billing clerk had caused such a massive financial dispute, Beatrice laid out the cold, hard facts. She told Victoria that I was Richard and Evelyn's eldest daughter, a highly respected senior auditor who had flown 14 hours after paying the wedding deposit only to be locked out and lied about so my parents could look wealthier than they were. Victoria Thorne was a woman of immense integrity. Horrified by the deception, she called an emergency meeting with my parents, Clara, Tristan, and her husband. When confronted with the deposit receipts, my mother tried to claim it was a collaborative family fund. But Tristan, looking at the bank statements, pointed out my name on the card transaction. My father was forced to admit they had no savings to cover the $45,000. Victoria Thorne looked at my father and said, "Honesty and financial integrity are the cornerstones of our business. If you are willing to publicly deny your own daughter and fabricate financial stability to secure a contract, we cannot trust you with our hotels." My father's workshop was officially disqualified from the multi-million-dollar renovation project. The Thornes refused to pay a single cent of the $45,000. Tristan, furious at the deception, forced Clara to cancel their French Riviera honeymoon to use the refunds to pay off a portion of the vendors. They had to take out a high-interest personal loan to cover the rest. To pay off her share, Clara had to take on a demanding full-time administrative job at a local design firm, abandoning her dreams of a life of leisure. My father was forced to sell his vintage boat and restructure his workshop, taking on a strict debt repayment plan with the vendors. My mother's punishment was social. Victoria Thorne quietly stepped down from their shared chairmanships on local charity boards, making it clear to the community that she could no longer associate with someone whose personal and financial integrity was so thoroughly compromised. In their small Vermont town, whispers spread fast. Evelyn's carefully crafted social image shattered into dust. 2 weeks after the wedding, Clara sent me a 5-page message. It wasn't a real apology. She spent 4 pages complaining about her lost honeymoon and her new job before asking if I could temporarily cover one of her loan payments. I didn't reply. A month later, however, I received an email from my father. The subject line read, "No excuses." He wrote that he had chosen a business opportunity over his eldest daughter and that there was no justification for his cowardice on that driveway. He stated that he would repay my $6,000 deposit in $500 monthly installments. He didn't ask for forgiveness. The next morning, $500 arrived in my account with the memo, "Repayment 1 of 12." He has not missed a single month since. It didn't fix the past, but it was the first time my father had ever chosen accountability over an excuse. Clara finally sent a real apology 5 months later. She admitted she saw me through the glass, that she was selfishly protecting her own perfect day, and that she had allowed them to treat me like an object. We now speak on the phone once a month for 30 minutes. The conversations are guarded, but they are honest. My mother has never apologized. She still tells relatives that I overreacted and ruined the family over a misunderstanding. But I no longer care. Today, my life in Seattle is peaceful. I began going to therapy where I learned about functional over-responsibility, the habit of measuring my self-worth by how many of other people's crises I could solve. I established 4 strict personal rules. I will never co-sign a loan for a family member. Any financial assistance I provide will be documented legally or clearly designated as a one-time gift. I will never provide financial backing for an event I do not actively organize or control. I will wait 72 hours before responding to any major emotional or financial request. These boundaries aren't a punishment for them. They are a shield for me. I joined a local sailing club, spent my weekends hiking the Pacific Northwest, and surrounded myself with friends who love me for who I am, not what I can write a check for. I stopped paying for a seat at a table where I was only welcome if I brought the feast. And in doing so, I finally found my own peace. If you were standing on that driveway, would you have approved the payment to keep the peace? Or would you have drawn the exact same line? Let me know in the comments by typing boundary if you've learned to protect your own peace, or share your story if you're still trying to break free. Thank you for listening, and remember, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time.